Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Lisa Grace Wilson, and we are live on the Empowering Teachers to Use the Science of Reading webinar. I'm just giving us a couple of minutes while people come in and just watch the numbers ramp up. I'm very, very happy to have you all here today. We are now at 42 participants, and it's 46 and 49, and it just keeps going up, and we're 53. So we're really delighted that you took time out to be with us today on this webinar. I am very, very happy to have with me a very esteemed panel, by the way, who will be just introducing themselves. We have Dr. Chassie Selouane, we have Dr. Jennifer Ricks, and we have Tony Mafood, and of course, I'm Lisa Grace. And so before we get into it, we want to know who we have on the webinar with us today. So this is your opportunity. If you look to your right, there is a chat, webinar chat. Can you put where you're listening from, if you want to put your name, if you want to put the name of your school, if you want to just say hello, that would be so good for us to see who is in the chat. So if everybody just writes something, then that would be brilliant. Okay, so we are in the Q&A. Pristine Private School, hello. Oh, Dubai, WSR, welcome. Yes, I see you all in the Q&A. The Q&A section looks amazing. Thank you so much. Without further ado, I would like our panelists to introduce themselves, starting with Ms. Chassie Selouane.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chassie Selouane. I am from North Carolina, but have been living in the Middle East for the past 15 years. And I'm so happy to be here today. I am an American curriculum specialist and have worked in schools throughout the United States, North Africa, and here, of course, in the Khaleesi region.
Thank you very much. And now we'd like to hear from Dr. Jennifer Ricks.
Interestingly enough, I'm also from North Carolina originally. I have been living in Abu Dhabi for the last 7 years, where I have the honor of serving as the Director of Learning. And prior to that, I have worked in Asia, and I'm so happy to be here to share with everyone.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Dr. Jennifer. Tony.
Thank you. So it seems like my colleagues and I have flip-flops. I'm originally from Lebanon. I moved to the United States about 21 years ago. And I'm an educational sales consultant with Curriculum Associates. My background is in curriculum instruction and building leadership. Very excited to be here with you all and to bring the amazing science of learning and the pedagogy practices to you all. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. It's so good to have you all here with us today. And thank you to everybody who has gone live in the chat. It is so good to see so many people, not in the chat, sorry, in the Q&A, to see so many people coming back to us from where they're from, Atlas School in Saudi, etc. Now, to get to the matter of hand, I would love to, first of all, talk about the importance. Today's webinar will deal with some key questions. One, we're going to be looking at how we can help you on your journey to implementing the science of reading in your school. But before we get into that, we also want to be looking at why the science of reading is important. And we will talk to all the panelists about that. And then we're also going to be looking at what is the current status quo in this region. A lot of us have a lot of experience in this region. We know exactly what the lay of the land is, and so we want to look at the what. And then we are going to look at the how. How can we do this? Because the title of the webinar is Empowering Teachers to Implement the Science of Reading. And so the how becomes super, super important. We want you to be able to walk away having learned a thing or two. That is our aim today for today's webinar. But then if you stay with us till the very end of the webinar, we also have some resources to share with you. And those resources you can take, you can look at, you can take from them and implement straight away. So the bonus is all 100 and odd of you that are here currently, we have a little gift for you, but you have to stick till the end of the webinar to see and to benefit from that. All right, deal? Okay, let's get going because we have an hour and we want to keep it sharp and quick. Let's start off with why this is so important. Now, I'm going to speak from my perspective, and then I'm going to turn over to the rest of the panelists. Now, many of you know me from Teach Middle East, but some of you may not know that my original thing was I taught languages, I taught reading, I taught literacy before I went into school leadership. So that's my background. And reading is super important. Without it, there is no access to the curriculum. There is no access to knowledge. This is very, very important. It's one of those key receptive skills. Yes, listening is important, but even listening is aided deeply by your ability to read. And so when we talk about implementing the science of reading, what we're talking about is implementing a way to allow students to access not only the curriculum, but life in general, because everything around us, written text, contains the knowledge we need to move forward. And so why is this important? I'm going to actually turn over first to Chassie, then to Dr. Jennifer, and then Tony. Let's go.
All right. So basically, just like you said, there's numerous reasons. I mean, it provides us evidence-based strategies for teaching reading effectively. It's all going to be aimed on enhancing learners' understanding and proficiency. We need to make sure that our students, and especially here in the Middle East, where students are ESL learners, they need to have access to phonemic awareness and phonics. And, these are foundational blocks of reading that they may not get if they are a non-native speaker as well. It also underscores the different learning paths and different paces. And, we need to understand that kids grow and develop at different levels. And, finally, I think a big thing is the neurological changes that take place when kids are learning to read. It helps them solidify cognitive benefits of reading. It enhances their memory, attention span, and it also allows them the creative thinking, being able to picture a place in your mind and understanding and the comprehension. I know that I got lost in a book many times as a child. And I think this, in the end, it will foster this need of lifelong learning, right? We try so hard to get the kids to, we say all the time, we're creating lifelong learners. Well, how do you do that? Through reading and the passion of reading. So that's why it's important to me.
Thank you, Chassie. Dr. Jen?
Yeah, of course, I second all of those things. And then in the context of a school like ours that serves a very diverse global population, it's really important because those foundational skills are in place regardless of the first language. So at our school alone, we have 23 different languages spoken as a first language by our student population. So that is a whole lot. And this body of research really works well regardless of your linguistic background. Another reason that it's really important for schools with a very diverse global population is consistency and international benchmarks. So consistency is something we often don't have a whole lot of when we serve mostly an expat population. You might only be at a school for 2 years or 3 years, and then you move to another country that has a different educational framework. And so how do you know if you're on track? Well, most schools that serve a population like that measure themselves against international benchmarks. And so that way I know what I'm shooting for. I know what it looks like for an 8-year-old to be reading, whether they're in Beijing or New York or Beirut, it doesn't matter. So those are some of the reasons that it is really, really important to utilize these high impact strategies in a school that serves a very diverse population.
Thank you, Tony.
I'd love to really actually build on the international benchmarking because I think that's really important to speak of it from the data perspective. We Curriculum Associates have the pleasure of having an iReady diagnostic assessment where we're able to assess students on the universal screener just to see kind of where they are in all of the domains, not just foundations, but also comprehension of vocabulary. And the research over the last couple of years has been very interesting to just kind of see the state of the union of where our students are when it comes to reading, which I'd love to share with you all. So when we're talking about benchmarking, we're talking about where are the students when it comes to on-grade level proficiency in reading. And what we have been able to see is the track of students where they leave first grade proficiency and how does that determine where they will be proficient wise in third grade. We all know why third grade proficiency is very important when it comes to reading for our students when we're transitioning from that learning to read to reading to learn. So what we have really seen is students who are proficient in first grade when it comes to really knowing and the word recognition and foundational skills, only 3/4 of those students ended up remaining proficient by the time that they reached third grade. So interestingly enough, what happened to those students that were already below grade level in first grade? Students that are struggling readers. Well, when we're looking at the proficiency level of them in third grade, only about 8% of those students that came in below grade level in first grade ended up reaching proficiency by the time that they reached third grade. That's very important for us to really determine about changing lives and trajectory of life for our students, especially helping them to really understand the code and build on that word recognition to ultimately lead into what comprehension is going to be. So then we further our studies and our research a little bit more to just kind of see where they are from a trajectory of kindergarten through 8th grade, pre-pandemic to where they are now, and are we catching back up to pre-pandemic terms? About 70% of our students in third grade pre-pandemic were proficient, but that number dropped drastically to about 50% proficiency by the time they reached first grade and on. And that was pre-pandemic. So what's happening now over the last couple of years is we're catching back up, or we're catching back up very, very slowly to pre-pandemic terms in grades 4 through 8, but we are not close to where we were pre-pandemic in K through 3. And to be honest, to start off with where we were pre-pandemic, we weren't in such a good shape anyways. So things needed to be changed. The way that we approach reading needs to be changed. So when we're talking about the science of reading, we're really talking about the science of instruction. And really that research has been grounded in national data since the years of 2000s, but really the more recent brain research of 2018. And it all deals with the automaticity of the code, recognizing the name of the letter and the sound that it makes early on into mastery, so that we're allowing our students to get access to grade level reading and building that bridge from word recognition to fluency, which we'll be talking a little bit more about.
Yes, thank you so much. The actual thing that you mentioned just there was the gap that may have widened as a result of what has happened during the pandemic. Now we have to understand that that gap varies from school to school. Some schools no gap, while others saw a very wide gap. So we now need to address, and then it's not only school to school, but we also have to understand it's class to class within a school where there are gaps that are varying in nature. So that the why is very, very important. I want to turn to our webinar audience and just ask them, why do you think, and please use the chat is now open, why do you think implementing the science of reading in your school very important? Why do you think it's important? So jump in the chat. I'll give you a couple of seconds. So just jump in the chat with us, all 100 and what looks like 30 odd of you now, to tell me or to tell us why it is so important that we implement the science of reading in our schools. And I'll read out some of them, as many as we can get to. Why is the science of reading implementation important in your school? Someone says majority is EAL. Reading is important to enhance our learning skills. They don't understand what we're saying, so there's a long barrier. Hence, it's important. It's important because the students can only be good writers only if they can read. You're so right. Reading helps to access, of course. We need to raise the literacy levels, also improve benchmark testing results. This is super. Now it's coming in thick and fast, so I'll just get as many as I can. Reading is fundamental for learning. I want to put that as a slogan. We should put that as a slogan in our schools. Reading is fundamental for learning. And I think once we have that on every door, every classroom, that would actually, concretize that. So keep them coming in even while I keep moving forward with the discussion. Want to call on Chassie to talk a little bit about her experience in the region. So we're now moving from the why, because the why is fully established. We know exactly why it's important, and you guys are giving me some great answers there in the chat. And if you're watching this webinar recorded, put it in the comments. Why is the science of reading implementation important? So if you're watching this recorded, we would also like to have that in the comment section as well, wherever you're watching this. Now, Chassie, coming into the GCC, we know that things are ever evolving. So like you, I've been long time here, and so have you. What do you think are some of the issues that we're facing in the GCC as it relates to improving reading and implementing the science of reading in schools?
I really believe that at school after school, I go into schools and I don't see the culture of reading. As someone made a comment just a second ago saying that, we've got to read across all the curriculums to build our analyzing and to build just knowledge and that passion for learning. And if kids are not seeing the model of people reading, and I think this is where we've gone kind of astray a little bit, because everything's so digital. We're watching TV, we're watching games. We're not the culture of just holding a book and reading a book and getting, like I mentioned earlier, about getting lost in the story or getting lost in the book. We tend to go click the television. So, I think developing a culture of reading, building stronger libraries, making sure that we have libraries that have good ratios of books for students in whatever language is being taught in that school, whether it's English, Arabic, French, Spanish, whatever. They need to be able to read across all the languages that are taught as well, and develop the thing that we need to remember. And I think Dr. Jen said it earlier, is literacy happens in all the languages. And so, if you maybe are struggling as an ELL student reading, that doesn't mean that you need to be struggling as a native Arabic speaker reading. You should be able to read your language as well. So, for me, I really believe that just creating that culture, the lack of, we've all got so busy and we're all attached to our phones and our devices now. I think we've kind of lost that culture of reading. I know many times I'm on a plane in this region, and I carry a book everywhere I go. I mean, Grace, you know me for a long time. I carry a book, and I'll open a book and people say, "Oh, are you a doctor?" Because the idea of, just because I'm reading. And so everyone should be reading. We need to come up with ideas to really promote, and we need to model it. And as educators, we need to be reading. When I was in a classroom, I used to carry a book in my bag, whatever book I was reading. And I always made sure I would lay it on my desk. And the kids would say, "Miss Chassie, what is that you've got?" And I'm like, "Oh, that's the book I'm reading," because that way I'm modeling that I'm reading. Someone said that they've actually been given that too. Are you a doctor on the plane because they're reading?
Yeah. So what I've realized, thank you so much, Chassie. What I've realized is that the culture. So I came out here in 2010, and so now we're looking at the what. What I've realized is that the culture of reading is one that is not as strong regionally, and it's nothing against the culture. It's just that it's a more oral society, and so stories are passed down by speaking and generations getting together in their households and talking. And there is something beautiful about that. There is something fantastic about that oral tradition. But what is also important is to understand that with that comes the lack of reading culture. And you are coming up against the lack of reading because it's not something that's done culturally easily, although that's changing. And then you're also coming up against a lack of access to the language of instruction in a lot of the schools. So the juxtaposition is that we're speaking to students, we're trying to teach reading in a situation where the student's first language is not the language of instruction. And so we're handing them books, and we want them to, one, read for information and read for pleasure in a language that they don't access easily. And so that hurdle by itself makes the whole thing quite difficult. When I came out here first, when we went into the schools, I was a part of the committee for the Abu Dhabi Education Council, changing that curriculum and making it English medium. Now, we can argue a little bit about whether or not that was a wise move or it should have remained in the first language, but that's not for this webinar. But what I know is that with that came the hurdles of not only getting the students to read, but getting them to a proficiency level in English to allow them to access the curriculum at a very good level. And that still happens till today. But it's not just the Arabic as a first language that's the problem now. The problem is we now have several first languages in the same class, all trying to access one lingua franca, which is English, and then to move them from that to a place where they are happy to start reading for pleasure is quite a mammoth task. So luckily we've got people like Tony and Curriculum Associates and the kind of software and things that we're trying to implement to help us along that journey. But I wanted to go back to you, Chassie, in terms of the strides that have been made in the region, because we have to acknowledge that there has been strides made, along with things like the Vision 2030 in Saudi Arabia and what we've gone through as Vision 2020 here in the UAE, etc. How far have we come, do you think?
Oh, leaps and bounds. Absolutely leaps and bounds. And, you know, I mean, in the past 15 years, just the progress has been just phenomenal here in the Middle East. And so, you know, something, and I can talk a little bit because I was in the UAE for the Vision 2020 and saw how that really progressed. And now here I am in KSA. And, you know, we have the Saudi Vision 2030, and it's really ambitious. I mean, we're really trying to diversify the economy and develop public services sectors and, you know, the education. And we really want to move towards that 21st century literacy. And that's part of the 2030 vision. And so, you know, there's several ways that Vision 2030 is making those significant improvements. Is one, that we're implementing new educational policies. You know, there's reform in education, placing a focus on skills like problem solving, student-centered learning, critical thinking, and digital literacy. And that's essential in today's world. But, you know, to be digitally literate, you also have to be literate. You can't read. If you can't read and if you can't access what you're reading, you can't succeed in digital literacy. Another thing that we're really focusing on here is modernizing the curriculum. You know, we're really trying to push those pedagogical strides within the classroom. Again, you know, I'm so glad that Tony was talking about international benchmarks. We're trying to meet those international benchmarks. We're trying to meet those global standards. You know, we're reshaping our lessons here in the kingdom to really improve those basic literacy skills, not only in the English language, but also in what we call the Saudi identity subjects. So in the Arabic subjects. And, you know, we're working on that bilingual education. And, you know, they're even now in some of the government schools and some of the international schools, they're adding Chinese and working on trying to get Chinese brought in, or Mandarin brought into so even trilingual on that part. Another thing that 2030 does is really focus on creating creativity, focusing on the arts. And then a part of that is reading and creative writing and encouraging creative writing, you know, and then integrating the technology. We want to have that digitized education, but we also want it to be engaging and interactive. Again, with those digital literacy skills, and then teacher training. That's another really big key. We want to modernize our teaching practices and pedagogies. We want to have good training and give training opportunities, bringing more and more PD opportunities here to KSA for our teachers. And, you know, one of the things I think that the ministry has done is they've brought in literacy standards, and they've brought in standardizing towards the Arabic curriculum, and now they're requiring more and more. They're following up more and more with, similar to the way the UAE did with like the American curriculum and the British curriculum. They're starting to kind of come in and work with us. And then the biggest part of this is the lifelong learning. Really, they want everyone to realize that we need to promote a culture of lifelong learning. And this comes from the basis of literacy, like you're talking about. We want that continual self-improvement, knowledge acquisition, and, you know, just having improved literacy overall. Because in the end, Vision 2030, while it is ambitious, but with these innovative reforms like enhancing literacy rates and offering citizens the required tools they need, we're going to have that diversified knowledge-based economy, and Saudi is going to just really soar. And so I really think that, mashallah, inshallah, we will be able to do here in Saudi what I've seen take place over the years in UAE. And just in 2 years here in Saudi, mashallah, tabarakallah, just the leaps and bounds that we're seeing here is phenomenal. And I really think it's because we have strong leaders here that are really the definition of educational disrupting. They are disrupting the traditional ideas and bringing in, trying to bring in this focus on let's strengthen and build our community through education and through learning, which is really phenomenal.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chassie. I think over the years, we actually want to celebrate the fact that we have come a long way, because in the UAE, really, I can speak personally from that perspective, is that we have come a long way to really pull the ship forward. Dr. Jen, you're from a different context in terms of your school being ACS Abu Dhabi. Give me from your perspective what you see as what's helping to drive that love of reading in your school?
I think lots of times it's context, it is reading to learn about things, for exposure, to be able to do things, to be able to create, to be able to communicate. It's so much of it is context, and some of those skills that Chassie talked about, collaborating and communicating with each other and being able to express yourself and access technology and all of those kinds of things. I think those are some of the main drivers.
Yes, brilliant. Let me ask our audience then, what are some of the issues you're finding in your school as it relates to reading and developing that love of reading? Because we're on the what, and so before we go on to the how, I'd love to know what some of your concerns are. Please use the chat, not the Q&A. The chat is now live. Please use the chat. Let us know what your issues are. What are some of your concerns with reading within your school's context? So I'll give you a moment to do that. Technology, someone says. Wow, pronunciation and understanding of what they're reading. Okay, keep them coming. Remember, if you stay till the end, we have some resources to share with you that you can download. Someone says comprehension. Drop everything and read. Are your students good at their time? Do they really take it seriously? Or are their brains wandering off somewhere else? Reading based on phonics, they cannot read very well. Reading skills, word decoding. Okay, someone says their time is distracted. This is very good information. How can we make their time less distracting?
I want to know if with DEAR, are the teachers and everyone within the school doing it? Because I think that is something really important. Again, we were talking about modeling a little earlier. And I think a lot of times in schools where they don't take it seriously, the teachers are not participating as well. Everyone, if we're going to drop everything and read, everyone in the school, I'm talking the janitors, I'm talking the receptionists, everyone should just be reading and creating that passion and that love for reading.
Yeah. One of the things that I think works is that we need to have a culture in which the school knows that everyone is a teacher of reading. So everyone is teaching reading, from the science teacher to the math teacher. So everyone is. But how? So let's get to the meat of the matter. How do we implement the science of reading? So I'm going to call on Dr. Jennifer to talk about how can we implement the science of reading. And this section of the webinar is strategy based. So first, Dr. Jennifer will talk us through some strategies that will help us to do this very practically. And then once she's done, we'll turn over to Tony and we'll also talk some more strategies. Go on, Dr. Jennifer. How can we do this?
All right, so Lisa Grace promised you some things if you stay till the end, and one of those is a handout about one of the strategies that really almost anyone can use, and that's reciprocal teaching. And so this is a strategy. I have used it with adults. I used it when I was an AP World History teacher because I did believe it's also my job to teach reading. And you can use it with little ones. You can use it with kindergartners. And so what is reciprocal reading? Well, it's just one of those great examples of gradual release. And it's utilizing collaboration and thinking about your thinking and all of these really high impact strategies all packed into one. So what is it? What do you do? So basically you have students in groups of 4 and they take on a role. And so one of the things you'll get is this handy dandy little paper that has some role cards you could even cut out. So you're going to be one of 4 roles: a questioner, a clarifier, a predictor, or the summarizer. And so as a teacher, you can model this. And listen, this doesn't take any special materials. This doesn't take any special expertise. This is just the same way that you might do a read aloud. It incorporates so many of those same strategies. So when you're doing read alouds, that's building the fluency. It's an opportunity to build in comprehension around that disciplinary content. So in the chat, a couple of people mentioned the science and other content areas and that academic language. So this is the opportunity to select texts that you can use to build that. And when students they're clarifying, or maybe they're the one asking questions, they're going to use those decoding strategies. So it's a relatively safe way in a collaborative experience for students to practice a lot of these high yield strategies. So if you are going to do this, I bet you didn't know you were going to get a little tiny lesson today. So I can show you how to do this. So you might have a book. I could choose one of my books right here behind me, but this is a great little book. And so as the teacher, the first part of I'm going to do it for you, the first thing we might do is just take a look at the cover of the book and notice. So it's really important for us as adults, with our own children, with the students in our class, to be visible about the way that we're thinking. So, oh my gosh, what do you notice? So look, I see a monkey and a bear, and there's cactus. And I wonder where you have monkeys and bears and cactus all in one spot. This is really interesting. I wonder what this book is about. And so those are the kinds of things you would do whenever you're introducing this. And so you could introduce each of the 4 roles separately, have students practice those, and then you can model the strategy together before they get into a group to do this. And what that might look like in a little book like this, don't worry, we're only going to do the first page. And so in this book, I chose it because it's big and bright and you could possibly see it. So you'll see lots of polar bears. And then here, I'm a polar bear. That's me paddling in the water near my friends. Life is quiet and peaceful on the ice. But wait a minute, what's that noise? All right, so students would then have each of their 4 roles, and you could model. And on this handout that you'll get, it gives you some of the things you might hear if you're the questioner. So if you were the questioner in that group, you might say, you know, like, why is that bear white? I've never seen white bears. I've seen brown bears. Is that the same? You know, what's a polar bear? I don't know. If you're the clarifier, you might hear the clarifier saying things like paddling. Is anybody else confused by that word? Well, in the context, it says you're paddling in the water, and I see this one bear with his feet in the water. Paddling must be something that you're doing, you know, with your feet. And then if you're the predictor, I think that's the most exciting role. You get to guess what's going to happen. So at the end, what's that noise? So the predictor can say, oh, I bet this is going to be an adventure. Something's going to happen. Oh my goodness. I bet something's going to happen, and it might be a bad thing or a good thing. And then the summarizer, that's where you're building, again, those comprehension skills. You're going to say, hey, so this part of the text was about 3 bears and they're together and then they hear a noise. So it's really, really simple. And this is a strategy. Some of the people in the chat said lack of resources, things like that. Anybody can do this. You can use this simple strategy with all kinds of different age groups, with any kind of book. You can have children in small groups. You can use it with informational text. You can use it with fiction, but it is one of those strategies that almost anyone can implement quite simply, and it has so many other high impact things in there. And the research around this particular strategy has an effect size of 0.74. That's huge. That means it's really high yield. So you're going to get a lot of bang for your buck when you do strategies like this. So that is just one. And Tony's going to tell you about a whole bunch more of strategies, but I wanted to model one simple one that everybody could go away with and try.
Amazing. Thank you, Dr. Jennifer. Tony, how can we do this?
So reciprocal teaching really speaks to me because as a curriculum instruction leader, I actually had my math teachers, science teachers, social studies really implement it in all of their classrooms. So when Dr. Jen really shared it out, it's not just a reading strategy in ELA classrooms, it's done everywhere. And I shared on my first webinar of how I was a struggling student, right? Because I struggled with reading, therefore I struggled with problem solving when I moved to the States. But reciprocal teaching has done wonders when it comes to our L students and students who really struggle with problem solving and reading to understand and reading to learn. So that's amazing. When Dr. Jen shared it, I was like, absolutely, 100%. But I do want to take a step back in terms of, we talked about meaningful groupings and creating purposeful groupings to be able to do this, right? The reciprocal teaching aspect of things. And Lisa mentioned oral society. We are an oral society, right? So our students we listen to stories, we hear stories, we communicate, but it's really the culture of reading that is not strong. And a lot of folks in the chat really echoed that. So I always like to start off with, well, what do we know about our students? And actually someone in the chat mentioned, we have curriculum expectations versus student levels. That really resonated with me because that's very powerful. How do we know what our students know and not know for us to really provide meaningful support to keep up with curriculum expectations? And when we're talking about curriculum expectations, it's 21st century learning of how do we expect them to become model citizens to eventually be able to be successful beyond their high school careers, whether it's college, whether it's the work life and so forth. So it really starts off with a meaningful RTI process. So what do we have in our systems in place that are universal screeners that allow us to really identify where our students' levels are when it comes to reading and their ability to read? So an RTI model, when you're looking at tier 1 instruction versus tier 2 and tier 3, really helping us understand our core program and what is our core program trying to show for our students. So our core program are grade level expectations. What are we supposed to teach when it comes to foundation skills in K2? What are we supposed to teach when it comes to comprehension and reading comprehension in grades 3 and above, which a lot of folks mention when it comes to comprehension of vocabulary. So that's our core. But understanding our student levels to really support meaningful tier 2 and tier 3 intervention is very powerful to really see where our students are starting off with to provide them that level of support that is necessary. So from RTI perspective and really understanding the levels of our students, we then jump into basically what is the science of instruction. And when we're talking about the science of instruction, we're now talking about Scarborough's role and the connection between word recognition and language comprehension. So my biggest feedback that I have, folks, is to take a look at your word recognition and look at your instructional practices and the science of evidence-based when it comes to word recognition. So take a look at your phonemic awareness and letter instruction that takes place in the classroom. And the biggest thing that I tell folks is when you're teaching phonemic awareness and letter recognition and high frequency words is that you're doing it in an explicit and systematic way. So the easiest thing for us to do when it comes to that is how are we making a connection between decoding and encoding words? Are we providing students opportunity to decode, be able to read, and encode spell words? So including word analysis like syllables, morphemes, and so forth. And at the end of the day, when you're teaching those foundational skills, how are we connecting it to text? Because the biggest thing that our students have challenges with when it comes to comprehension is that we are not connecting word recognition to fluency. So when you're looking at your word recognition and the way that you're teaching your foundational skills, what text are you allowing your students to immediately work into and build into so they can work on that fluency and that connection between what they just were able to decode and encode and now apply it to some reading strategies and reading text that is going to be engaging for them. And the biggest thing is that those texts that they're getting into, those connected texts, they have to be tied to the phonics skills of the week. They have to be tied to the high frequency words of the week. Now, when we're teaching high frequency words, it's very important for us to make sure that we are embedding it through our encoding and decoding skills of the week, and not just having them memorize 107 high frequency words that exist in our system, right? So how are we embedding it from a decoding and encoding perspective? How are we teaching high frequency words in a meaningful way? And at the end of the day, how are we connecting it to connected text? So those are some really important strategies for us to really consider from a K2 perspective as we work our way to that transition around language comprehension. When we get to that language comprehension, the reciprocal teaching, reciprocal learning that Dr. Jen really resonated when it comes to language comprehension. But what are we doing to put complex text in front of our students and supporting them with read alouds? Our students, when you're talking about meaningful groupings, like we mentioned, we're an oral society. There are students that are going to be able to read and comprehend those texts, and there are some that are not. So how are we purposefully grouping them to really support the access of each of the students through read alouds, so we are keeping up with that rigor of complex text? So we are not sacrificing grade level rigor in complex text because our students simply cannot. We have to get rid of the word cannot and really provide that access. So bringing back to the RTI model, meaningful groupings of students through paired reading, understanding the readability and the Lexile scores of the students and what they're capable of doing, being very strategic with my groupings. Have robust conversations for our students to develop academic language. They can't read. What are we doing to really work on their oral fluency and having academic language and conversations around academic languages? So then my feedback to folks would be, as you're engaging in grade level text and rigorous text, what are you doing to pre-teach vocabulary? What are you doing to pre-teach academic vocabulary? How are you embedding visuals and representations and culturally relevant content for your students? So when they are reading, they're reading about things that are important for them. They're understanding and hearing and having meaningful conversations with you and with their colleagues around this. And then how are we embedding gradual release and explicit instruction to also our older striving students? We have older striving students that might come in with decoding issues. We've been seeing that all around. So we have to embed strategies in there to still teach phonics. We have to embed strategies in there to still allow our students to be able to decode, but you have to do it in a faster pace, not like we do it in K2. So how are you doing it through multisyllabic words versus single syllable words, CBCE words like we do in K2? So we have to expand and really fast forward that intervention at a faster pace for our grades 3 and above scholars, so that we are putting text that is engaging for them, that allows them to communicate and have meaningful conversations around the text that we're putting for them. And a lot of folks talked a lot about providing culturally relevant text for our older striving readers, especially during dear time. There's not much phonics support that takes place. A lack of resources when it comes to supporting them, when it comes to their decoding skills. So there has to be a balance. So I know and we recognize that students that are older striving students have those decoding issues, but we cannot lose out on putting meaningful text in front of them. And it starts with culturally relevant text that really engages them. And even though they can't read it, what are we doing to really support through our RTI model to give all of those students access through oral reading fluency? And then utilize strategies like what Dr. Jen mentioned, which is the reciprocal learning to allow students to work with each other and learn from each other. So it's not so teacher focused, but more student to student focused. And they learn more and they're engaged more when they're learning from each other versus just depending on the teacher to provide all of that level of support. So Lisa will be sharing with you all a few checklists that we have kind of looked at and developed around word recognition. And if I'm looking at my foundational skills in the classrooms, what should I keep in mind as I'm teaching foundational skills? And all of those strategies that I talked about of connecting foundations to immediately fluency through connected text, we'll see those in the checklist. And you know what I really encourage is for you to go back and take a look at your curriculums and ways that you can really navigate and make that curriculum more systematic and explicit in this teaching, where it's connecting text to students' word recognition and being able to do those word recognition. And then for older striving students, what are we doing to embed strategies like reciprocal learning? What are we doing to support vocabulary teaching and pre-teaching? But at the end of the day, we're keeping the grade level rigor at the forefront of our students. We're having that can-do mindset that they're able to reach that grade level text and be able to read it. But what are we doing through our RTI support process to truly understand all of the reading levels of our students, meaningfully grouping them together and providing them access to pre-teaching of prerequisite skills, scaffolds that are necessary that will pre-teach what is going to be the grade level rigor and expectations. And if you're here on my next webinar, I will be diving so deep into content and programs that we have developed to really support. I see things like, can you recommend a phonics program? I don't want to be biased, but I'll recommend ours. I will be sharing on my next webinar a little bit more about program agnostic around magnetic reading. We have some folks in the Middle East that have been utilizing iReady and magnetic reading. I'd love to really share the stories and the strategies behind those two programs where we're talking about a meaningful universal screener that's supporting RTI and a meaningful teaching of foundations and connections from word recognition to language comprehension through a K-5 process. So I will be sharing those strategies. I'll be sharing a little bit more about the program in my next webinar. I hope to see you all there, but I'll turn it back to you, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Tony. That was really, really super useful. Very well said. Someone said in the comments. I think when we think about rigor, we can't also forget about the fact that it has to be at the students' grade levels. And sometimes what I've found here is when students can't read very well, we tend to want to give these teenagers nursery rhymes and little books because we think, yes, the language is accessible, but are they interested in that? So the nice balance is to try and find something that is really going to hold their interest, but also that they will be able to access and stretch them, you know, because we can't just give them easy peasy things to read and then they get bored. It also has to have that level of stretch involved as well. I want to ask Chassie and then Dr. Jen and then the audience to just give us any other strategies that you can think of that would be useful to our audience when implementing the science of reading in their classrooms. I know Dr. Jen already shared the reciprocal learning approach, which I'm going to share momentarily at 5:50 to be exact in the chat, so you can download those handouts. But just to take it back around to the panel after Tony's presentation, what other strategies come to mind as we seek to help our colleagues in implementing the strategies that you're thinking of?
So using your data to inform your learning. So, you know, knowing your levels of your kids and I think a lot of times people say, oh, I don't have a lot of resources, but if you are using any of the major textbooks, they're going to give you differentiated. Most of the schools have, you know, like HMH or McGraw-Hill or, you know, any of these big names, Pearson, whatever. They actually have the teacher toolboxes. And I think that a lot of times I know that teachers are surprised when I go in and I show them whatever system they're using. Oh, look, you actually have leveled readers built in that they can use the leveled readers. And, you know, and I think something that you hit the nail on the head there is we can't give teenagers nursery rhymes and expect them to be enthused about this. Lexile levels, knowing the Lexile level of your students and being able to differentiate the text. And this is what iReady is so, and magnetic reading is so great for, is because it's actually allowing you to have real data that then differentiates for each child, which is really amazing. And then you can take and whether you're chunking, whether you're, you know, doing key concepts, or even something that I've used in the past is interactive notebooks. And if doodling, I was a visual harvester for KHDA for many years. And so, or they're called sketch notes. If you don't know what visual harvesting is, you're not in the UAE, you probably don't know what visual harvesting is. But sketch noting, learning to take and draw what they're hearing or what they're reading about. And this is why graphic novels are so engaging to kids, because they can actually picture it, and encouraging your kids to maybe take a piece of text that they've read and create a graphic novel with them. So that's just a couple, but I know Jen has a lot more, so I'll turn it over to you, Jen.
Yeah, and I can just build on some of those things, especially when you talk about that love of reading, right? So modeling that. One of the things that we have in our school is on every door, there is a little whiteboard that says, this is what I'm reading. And every adult writes on there what they're currently reading so that everybody can ask you about it. And it's having that culture of reading with everybody in the community. And I think too, as we said, it's those high interest texts. I mean, I come more from a background of the humanities and social studies. And so, having those institutional agreements that we are all teachers of all students. We are all teachers of reading, and that we're all ultimately responsible for that collective, right? And so deciding that, those skills are going to be taught and reinforced in all classes. Having access to inquiry, things that kids are excited about. I'm telling you, if we're excited about something or we need to learn it, we will figure out a way. There's many a time I have tried to watch a YouTube video or read some directions or do something because I needed to learn something or I wanted to learn something. And so putting those things that are relevant, that are high engagement, that are high interest in front of students, knowing your students to know what those things are. So just like you need to know where their expertise and where their skills are as readers, know what their passions are, know what they're interested in, and make sure that you have something that they can dig into in terms of that. I think that those are just some of the strategies, and using the same strategies as a grade level. It's simple to just say, hey, you know what? We're all going to use See, Think, Wonder or something like that. Everybody's going to use that, whether it's the science teacher or the math teacher or the language arts teacher, doing things like that that provide consistency for students and really helping to reinforce those same skills. I think those are some simple ways, again, that it takes conversation with each other as adults and agreements, and those are often pretty simple things to get at whenever we all have the same shared beliefs that we're all here to support student learning.
Fantastic.
So,
yes, Tony, go ahead.
I just wanted to finalize just the final thought there. Just someone, Kushbu in the chat really put something that resonated with me. It said, replace predictable text with decodable text. And I think that's very powerful. There's a message for folks to kind of really understand there. Replace predictable text with decodable text and embed a predictable instructional framework. So what Dr. Jen shared, which is that reciprocal learning, that's a predictable instructional framework. The more that we can free up the learning space and brain space for our students to focus on understanding what they're reading with a predictable framework that they know every time I'm reading, I'm utilizing these strategies, the more that you're able to put more decodable text and more culturally relevant text and rigorous text in front of them that they're able to read, because now we're taking away those predictable texts where they've memorized, and we're engaging them in meaningful instructional frameworks that it's predictable for them. So a gradual release, an I do, we do, you do model, the reciprocal learning. So the more that we start engaging our scholars in that level of rigor and analysis, the more we're going to see our students really strive and break through whatever barriers that they have, because we're engaging them in meaningful strategies to read. And I really love what was mentioned there. So I just wanted to highlight that.
No, it's fantastic. Go ahead, Chassie. Last minute, 30 seconds.
I really think too is agency. Bringing agency into the classroom and giving kids choice. One of the strategies that I used to use is I would actually allow kids to choose books within their Lexile level. And then I would do something called a book in a bag. And they would have to do this project where all the kids were reading different books that they chose that they were excited about. Then they would have to decorate the outside of the bag with their summary. And then they would do the sides with like an author, a little bit of research about the author. And then they would say like the plot and the characters. And then on the back, they would have to do, did they recommend it? And they had to create the cover, a cover in their imagining of how they saw the book. And then they would have to put three to five items, depending what grade level they are, in the bag that represented something from the story. And then they would have to share it with the class and explain why they chose this and link it back to the story. And so then this really got them excited about reading. And they were like, when are we doing our next book in the bag? So these sort of things, I think giving agency and giving choice is really important, because if they like it's what they're interested in, like Jen said, then they're going to be passionate about it. They're going to love it. They're going to be excited.
Amazing. Thank you so much. We are running out of time, but I can't leave without taking some questions from the audience. Please do not put them in the Q&A, put them in the chat. Do you have any questions for our panel? We might be able to field one or two. And while you're thinking of your questions, please note that Curriculum Associates is available in the region, in the Middle East, to help you with your reading program needs. They can help you to address all your needs for the science of reading. So get in touch with Curriculum Associates. I'm going to, if I don't drop their link here in the chat, we will email you some more information about them. And also remember, there is one more webinar in this series coming up with Tony, where he's going to be giving you some more information to help you along your journey with implementing the science of reading in your school. So look out for those emails. But just whatever question you have, we only have 3 minutes. We would love to be able to answer any questions that you have. Someone says no question, but a huge thank you for providing some great new ideas. Please remember that you can actually download the resources, the PDFs that were shared, by just clicking open and saving them to your device. So just click open and saving them to your device. I see in the chat, sorry, yes, EduEnhance, they represent Curriculum Associates exclusively in the region, and you just need to email them at info@eduenhance.net. That's info@eduenhance.net. Where can I find the recording? Don't worry, the recording will be available on the Teach Middle East YouTube channel as soon as our webinar officially ends today. So maybe in another hour or so, the actual recording will be available on the Teach Middle East YouTube channel. Thank you so much. I want to take this opportunity to say a massive thank you while we're waiting for any last minute questions to Chassie Selouane, all the way from Saudi Arabia. Thank you so much for sharing your fabulous expertise with us today. It's been my pleasure working with you again, as always. Thank you again to Dr. Jennifer Ricks from ACS Abu Dhabi for being so kind and so generous with your knowledge and your expertise. It has been a fantastic opportunity to work with you as always. And to Tony Mahood from the iReady team in the United States. Thank you so much for sharing and for the fabulous handouts, which I'm sure will be of great use from both yourself and Jennifer. That will be of great use to the educators here in the Middle East. It's been a real pleasure working with you both. And thank you all for sticking with us. Oh, and we currently have 163. So in order to thank you, I'd like you to drop a thumbs up in the chat, an emoji of any sorts that you'd like. My name is Lisa Grace Wilson, and I am so delighted to have been your host for this webinar. Thank you so much. It is now 6 p.m. I love the emojis. Ooh, they're so fabulous. Thank you very much. Look out for details as we will be having one more webinar in this series. Thank you and good night.
And thank you, Lisa Grace, for hosting so wonderfully.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.